Hello and welcome everybody. Warm welcome to you all. Good morning if it's morning where you are, or good afternoon to everybody who's dialing in a later time zone. And thank you all very much for joining this launch webinar of the UN Environment Programme and Consumers International's new report, Can I Recycle This? A global mapping and assessment of standards, labels and claims on plastic packaging. We're very excited to be sharing this with you. So the agenda for today is, if we go to the next slide, is starting with a summary of the report and explaining our main findings, followed by some comments from some guest speakers, and then there'll be time and space for you as the audience to raise any questions. On this webinar platform, as the audience, you are all muted, so please do use the chat function to raise any questions, and we'll have some time and space at the end to ask those to any of the speakers or presenters today. So going on to the next slide, I'd like to introduce you to the voices that you'll hear today. And I'm extending my thanks now to the speakers on today's webinar, and we're really looking forward to hearing your interventions and comments. I am Naomi Scott-Mearns and I'm moderating today's launch webinar. I work for Consumers International as the Sustainable Consumption Manager, and I co-lead the Consumer Information Programme of the UN One Planet Network. Nils Hoyer and Johanna Doppinghaus from the UN Environment Programme will be providing an overview of the report. And then we are also pleased to be joined by 4 great speakers today who will be sharing their insights on the report, and I will introduce each of them as they speak. So going on to the context of this report, it's a joint report written by the UN Environment Programme and Consumers International, and it's an output of the Consumer Information Programme of the One Planet Network. The One Planet Network is a UN recognised implementation mechanism of Sustainable Development Goal 12, which is sustainable consumption and production. And over the past year, the One Planet Network has been working on the topic of reducing plastic pollution. And this is following a request by all the UN member states at the UN Environment Assembly in 2019 for the One Planet Network to form a set of guidelines for businesses, governments and consumers on how the topic of sustainable consumption and production is really important for tackling plastic pollution across the globe, and especially plastic pollution in the marine environment. And indeed, the widely quoted statistic that by 2050 there'll be more plastic in the ocean than fish, it's an issue that sustainable consumption and production can really help to tackle. So the report is entitled, Can I Recycle This? A global mapping and assessment of standards, labels and claims on plastic packaging. And it really gets to the heart of an issue which hasn't been examined in detail before, which is the role of the information to consumers that's displayed on plastic packaging. Information about sustainability and disposability and the materials of the plastic packaging and disposable plastic foodware. The report conducts a global mapping of the main different types of labels and claims that are visible on plastic packaging. And it also looks at the standards and certifications behind these labels. As part of the research as well, an expert assessment was also carried out, and we're really lucky to be joined by several of those involved in that assessment in the webinar today. So thanks again for your help. And the global assessment examined which labels and claims provide clear, accessible and reliable information to consumers. Because we really found in this research that consumer confusion is rife there, and there's a lot of misinformation in the market. And so today and tomorrow's webinars will provide a summary of this research report, and the report will be officially launched this Friday on the 15th of May, and it will be available for free download on the Consumers International and One Planet Network websites. So I'd now like to pass to Ms. Helena Leurent, the Director General of Consumers International, who's going to say a few opening remarks about the report and its context, and then we'll move to a full summary.
Awesome. Thank you, Naomi. Wonderful to talk to everybody on the call. I hope you are all safe, well, and weathering the storm wherever you are in the world. My name's Helena. I'm the Director General of Consumers International. absolute pleasure to be asked to open this webinar, and I want to thank and congratulate the excellent team behind it from UNEP, Consumers International, the Consumers International members around the world who were part of putting this together, and the many experts who lent their time and brilliance to what you will see later. I think it's worth mentioning we thought about the timing of this launch quite a bit because of what the world is experiencing right now. We are obviously going through a health and societal and economic crisis, which has not been seen and we hope won't be seen again in our lifetimes. But it was a real recognition of the fact that we are facing a climate crisis, that sense of the impending crisis was upon us even before we had to experience the pandemic. These issues are interlinked. You can't address health or economic or societal issues without addressing the environmental issues of our time. I'm sure that's evident to everybody on the call. And this is the moment when we need to take action. This needs to be, nonetheless, the decade of delivery in terms of how Consumers International puts it, creating a fair, safe and sustainable marketplace for all. We believe that consumers are an essential part of the marketplace, and actually by rebalancing the way in which consumers are part and their rights are expressed, we will actually have greater chance of reaching that fairness, safety and sustainability. If you think about the way in which consumer involvement has to happen in the digital marketplace, that's very clear. A circular economy has to be driven with consumer demand as part of that equation. And there's been too much emphasis on the role of producers and governments without the inclusion of the consumer voice in that. We can see that consumers care deeply about plastics and also about the future of their environment. And this is something that needs to be picked up and fast. One of the acupuncture points we see is, of course, the information going to consumers and the way in which we inform and create that respectful, healthy dialogue about what's going on between businesses and consumers. And labeling is one of those places where we can start to have that conversation in a different way. So I'm really pleased that we've been able to look at a set of labels on plastic packaging from around the world to draw some conclusions that I think are really pragmatic and can be taken up immediately. I really hope that on this call we start to see the questions and commitments that can drive forward with that action plan. We don't think a fair, safe and sustainable marketplace is a utopia. With the brilliant people on this call and around the world working on this topic, this is absolutely doable. And certainly from Consumers International perspective, we even changed our strategy to be able to open up and work with unusual partners to get things done. And so my commitment and the commitment of our organization and our members is to be part of that solution, a constructive, tough, but important player in reaching not just the outcomes of this report, but really the circular economy and the sustainable future that we are all looking for. So again, my congratulations to the team. A pleasure to be asked to give a few words to start this off, and I look forward to hearing very pragmatic, principled and purposeful actions coming from today and tomorrow to shape our work going forward. Thank you, Naomi. Back over to you.
Thank you very much, Helena. And so now I'm going to pass to Mr. Niels Hoyer, Associate Programme Officer at the UN Environment Programme and Coordinator of the Consumer Information Programme. And he's going to take us through an overview of the report, including those really practical recommendations and findings.
Yeah, thank you, Naomi. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're logging in. Thank you for joining the webinar. I'm happy to now start with the presentation of the report. So just for setting the scene and why we needed a report like this. So first of all, of course, plastic pollution is an important environmental challenge that we need to address. About only 9% of plastics are recycled, 12% are incinerated globally, and that means the vast majority of it goes into landfill or leaks into the environment. And especially when leaking into the marine environment, there's a lot of problems associated with that. There's a lot of plastic packaging, for example, is a prevalent problem in the marine litter and also found frequently on beaches. And a lot of plastic packaging is only used once and then discarded. And considering the durability of the material, it's a very inefficient use of it. And yeah, plastic takes very long to decompose and breaks down into smaller particles that can also enter the food chain, causing concerns about human health as well in the end. So when we thought about how we could, as the Consumer Information Program, contribute to solving this problem, we think we have most of the expertise in consumer information, how information should be provided to consumers, and also in labeling standards. And we also recognized that there was a lot of confusion from consumers around plastic items and how they should be properly disposed. So this is where we thought our report and doing a mapping that looks into communications on plastic packaging more detailed can add value to the discussion on plastic pollution and how we address it. And we also thought that consumers are already showing great awareness of plastic pollution. They want to reduce their consumption or have alternatives and want to recycle if possible. So I think there's a lot of leverage that we can use to make a difference if better information is provided. This can empower the consumers to play an important role in a transition towards sustainable consumption and the circular economy of plastics, which is where we want to go. And also plastic packaging is an important way. The information that is provided on plastic packaging can really help, because this is where the majority of consumers are looking for the recycling information and also other information about sustainability. So placing better information there can really better inform the consumer and help them get information about sustainability or the proper disposal and the content of the plastics. We also found, for example, one type of information where there was a lot of consumer confusion was about the difference between bio-based, biodegradable, and compostable claims and the implications of these claims. So it's clear that there needs to be better information out there, and maybe also better education, of course, hand in hand. So this is why we did this report. And now I'm going to quickly give an overview of how we structured the report in terms of methodology. So first of all, what we thought we wanted to look into is standards, labels, and claims, and we assessed them using a three-step approach. So first, we did an initial mapping of plastic packaging and foodware and the types of standards, labels, and claims associated with it, and then we categorized these claims and labels by their functionality. The main categories we identified are compostability, biodegradability, recyclability, recycled content, and also bio-based plastics. We then developed a comprehensive catalog of relevant standards, labels, and claims on plastic packaging. And for the assessment of labels in particular, we then used our guidelines for providing product sustainability information. This is a document the Consumer Information Program produced in 2017. And it outlines different principles on how to communicate sustainability information on products to the consumer. And the 5 fundamental principles are reliability, relevance, clarity, transparency, and accessibility. You can find the document also on our website, and we have done previously webinars about it as well. But basically, these principles should be adhered to when communicating any type of sustainability information. It can be applied to any product category. So also when we looked into the plastic packaging information, we assessed the labels and claims we found against these principles. And this was also done through an expert consultation. So we had about 33 experts on consumer rights, packaging, labeling, and standards from the private sector, public sector, also from all the world regions, so very diverse set of experts consulted, and they were then asked to assess the labels, the 30 labels we had in the report against these principles. And we had 5 positive net assessments, 8 neutral assessments, 6 negative assessments, and 11 mixed results, meaning that experts had divergent opinions on those labels. So it shows already that there's a lot of room for improvement in aligning these labels with the 5 fundamental principles of the guidelines for more reliable and clear consumer information. So now I'm handing over to my colleague Johanna for the second part of the presentation.
Thank you, Niels. So we had a look at standards, labels, and claims. First, standards defines specific criteria or norms for goods and services. And there are 3 primary standard setting bodies that govern the relevant standards for sustainable packaging. The first of them is the International Organization for Standardization, which creates the well-known ISO standards. Then there is the ASTM, and there is the European Committee for Standardization, which creates standards that start with EN. And if companies want to work with these standards, they must work with certifying bodies to demonstrate that they're compliant with the standards. And this is what differentiates a standard from labels. Next slide, please. Because a label is a logo or stamp that highlights product characteristics, and it may or may not represent the certification. So in this report, we had a look at 5 different categories of labels, and these categories differ in the message they convey to consumers. Some labels describe how the plastic was produced, for example, using recycled content or using bio-based plastic. Some labels indicate product characteristics at the end of life of the plastic, like being compostable or being biodegradable. Other labels provide guidance to consumers for how to dispose of an item. And lastly, some labels only indicate how the recycling of an item is financed. So an example for this last category, recycling finance, would be the very well-known green dot, because the green dot only indicates that a financial contribution was paid to a qualified national packaging organization for this plastic item. Analyzing these labels, we made some key findings for each category. Next slide, please. So labels that indicate how a plastic was produced mainly fall short on consistency. The percentage of recycled content is often not well defined, and labels for bio-based plastics should differentiate between conventional biomass or sustainably sourced biomass. And correctly disposing of an item that is labeled as being compostable or being biodegradable is also often not possible because the needed infrastructure is just not available. This underlines the importance of local relevance in the context of labels, which is also very critical for labels for recycling guidance. Lastly, labels for recycling finance might even be misleading for consumers, as their imagery is often suggestive of the general recycling symbol, while in fact this is not what they signal. Next to labels, this report also analyzed claims on plastic packaging. Next slide, please. So a claim is just a statement that is made by a company about the qualities of their product. And similar to labels, some claims are suggestive of how a plastic was produced, like being this plastic was made from recycled plastic, made from ocean plastic, or is bio-based. Other companies also provide claims stating that their products are recyclable, biodegradable, or compostable. The analysis of claims revealed similar shortcomings like the analysis of labels. For example, the calculation of recycled content is often very unclear when companies state that their products were made from recycled plastic, and also companies stating that their products made from bio-based plastics often do not indicate whether this biomass was sourced sustainably or not. Moreover, claims on compostability and biodegradability often do not take into account the available infrastructure, so making sure that consumers can actually dispose correctly of the item. And 2 more things are very important in this category. So first of all, the use of the general recycling symbol is not regulated. So this means that companies can claim that their products are recyclable and use the general recycling symbol with the chasing arrows, but actually there's no certifying mechanism behind this. And second, claims like made from ocean plastics are very widely used, but unfortunately, recycling ocean plastic is only a lower priority solution to the underlying problem, because a more effective solution would be to tackle the root cause and stop plastics from leaking into the ocean. So these were the key findings, and I hand back to Neil.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. So we are now also already coming to the final recommendations of our report. So we have identified 5 key recommendations in our report, and the first one is about following the guidelines. So we think businesses, but also labeling organizations, should follow the guidelines for providing product sustainability information in their plastic packaging communications. This means that they should align their claims or labels with at least the 5 fundamental principles. We have also 5 aspirational principles that go beyond that, but if you already align with the 5 fundamental ones, then this already helps a lot to clearly inform the consumer. And also, we found that there were quite, as I said before, we only had about 5 labels with positive scores, so it shows that there is room for improvement in a lot of them. And there were some examples where we found confusing imagery, or that labels failed to meet other requirements on such as reliability, relevance, clarity, transparency, or accessibility. So yeah, it's very difficult for the labels, I guess, to match all the 5 principles, but that is what should be aspired to. And one example that we had in the report, for example, is the SCS Global Recycled Content Certification. While it has a reliable mechanism in place and adheres to an ISO standard and it has a verified process, the imagery itself is not really well chosen, and so the clarity requirement is not really met here. We have a bird sitting on a branch, and it's a logo or a label about recycled content. So at first glance, it's suggesting something else, maybe like a general eco-label or something about wildlife or forest protection. So it's not a well-chosen image, I would say. And yeah, because consumers sometimes they only have a quick look, so it should be really immediately clear to the consumer what the label is about. The second recommendation that we had concerns the lack of consistency that we found in definitions around disposal and the content of plastic packaging, and we think that these definitions need to be harmonized on a global level, so that it becomes more consistent and less confusing for the consumers. Currently, there's a lot of variation between definitions on standards and also labels and claims and how they communicate. So this inconsistency makes it very, very difficult for the consumers to compare the different sustainability characteristics. 2 examples where we found this particularly problematic is claims about made from ocean plastic. So there are really wide variations in how ocean plastic is defined. Sometimes it's really plastic that has been retrieved from the ocean. Other times it's something within a 50-kilometer vicinity of an ocean, or so there's different ways and not an agreed terminology or definition of what ocean plastic is. It's still like a new concept in some sense. And yeah, also with the claim made from recycled plastic, there are different ways of how to calculate recycled content. So for example, there's pre and post consumer content. So ideally the more important one is the post consumer content, because we want to increase the recycling rate after the product has been used by the consumer to bring it back into the economy. And yeah, also a challenge with recycled content is that the claim can, by some consumers, be confused with recyclable claims, which are 2 different concepts. The third recommendation we had were that standards, labels, and claims need to better reflect actual conditions. So we found that quite often there can be a discrepancy between what a claim says on the packaging and what is likely to happen to that package in real life. And that's particularly problematic with compostability and biodegradability, but also recyclability, because a lot of countries don't have the appropriate recycling infrastructure in place yet. So that also refers to, for example, something the Ellen MacArthur Foundation addressed in their definition when they said that recyclability should be defined as something that must be proven to work in practice and at scale. So if someone claims on their packaging that the packaging is recyclable, it shouldn't be in theoretical concept. It's something that has to really happen in that location for it to be an accurate claim. And yeah, ideally claims the label should be based on recognized national or international standards. Again, the example where we found this problematic was the compostable and biodegradable claims. Really only a small percentage of people have access to the appropriate infrastructure, making this claim potentially meaningless. And it's also easily misunderstood. So people are not really familiar with these terms yet, and even the difference between compostable and biodegradable. And sometimes it gives a false impression that it's acceptable to dispose of these types of packaging into the environment, which can, yeah, increase littering or leakage into the environment and pollution. Then for the fourth recommendation, this concerns the use of the chasing arrows that was also outlined by Johanna earlier. So the chasing arrows, internationally accepted symbol for recycling, is not really regulated and has been used by a lot of other labels and also in images of claims, for example. So it's yeah, really confusing for the consumer if this is used in a context that is not about recycling specifically, and this can lead to higher levels of contamination of recycling streams. So we suggest that businesses or also the labeling organizations should use the chasing arrows design only for claims about recyclability, and yeah, should redesign it if they are using it in another context. The most problematic example we found in our report is the green dot, which is about recycling finance. So it indicates that a financial contribution to a packaging recovery organization has been paid by the company selling the package, but it doesn't automatically indicate recyclability. And this is a symbol that's been used a lot, particularly in Europe. And I think a lot of consumers associate it with recycling, or it gives the impression. And then if that's not the case, it's problematic. And there were other examples in the report, like the Australasian Bioplastics Association home compostable logo. Again, yeah, we had, I think, a few biodegradable or compostable labels that use these chasing arrows, even though it's a different concept ultimately. And finally, the final recommendation is that informative and verified recycling labels should be adopted and the proper use enforced. And this category of recycling labels had actually quite a few good examples. So this is also something positive in the report to outline. And we think these positive examples should be followed more frequently, and the labeling be used on more packaging. And this, of course, needs to go hand in hand with the right infrastructure provided by the governments, and also policies to enforce the use of this recycling guidance, so that consumers have better information and also better opportunities to contribute to the recycling of plastics. And the good examples that we had in the report for the Australasian recycling label being used in Australia and New Zealand, and also the Woolworths recycling labels in South Africa. And these are examples where you can see that even for the different components of the packaging, they give clear information which of it can be recycled and which of it needs to be disposed. And then the consumer has a clarity on that and can act accordingly. Now to close on the report, just a few more informations on what is going to happen next. So first of all, we're gonna release the report soon. Of course, we have another webinar coming up tomorrow. And also the webinar recordings will be shared on our YouTube channel of the One Planet Network. And after the report release, we will also continue to work on this important topic. We will try and develop key messages and collect best practice examples on how to communicate consumer information on plastic packaging. We will work again with the network of the consumer information programs and reach out to different stakeholders and develop key messages for policymakers, businesses, and consumers. And all our outputs on this plastics work will contribute to the One Planet Network-wide Plastics Initiative, and the guidance document is planned to be released in October or November 2020, and will then be presented at the next United Nations Environmental Assembly in February 2021. And also, we invite you all to share the key findings and messages of this report with your networks and the webinar recording and all this information, or reach out to us as well in the program if you would like to be involved in the further developments of the project. So now I'm handing back to you, Naomi.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And now I welcome our guest speakers, who are experts in eco-labelling, recycling and plastic packaging and consumer information in general. So first to Mr. Ulf Jaeckel, who is the head of division at BMU, the German Environment Ministry, and he's going to make some comments from the government perspective.
Thank you very much, Naomi. I hope you can understand me. Just give me a yes, and then I will continue.
Yes, you're perfectly clear now.
Okay, I'm joining only by phone because the problems with our data center. Our government has attached some importance to that resolution on plastic waste, which was the basis, and that's where we came from, why we started this work, and we supported the work financially. Even if the situation in Germany with plastic waste is not that bad as in as in some other parts of the world. So why do we think we have to address plastics? And let me share some views from the political point of view and the reasoning behind we are addressing that. I mean, plastic is everywhere, you know that. And yes, it's a good material. It's lightweight, it's durable, it's waterproof, etc. And if you look at the results of life cycle assessment, also in comparison to other materials, it's a lot of times and for a lot of purposes better than alternatives like metals or bamboo or any other thing. So it's very good, but when it ends up in nature, it's not that good. It's also durable, hundreds of years, and and if it ends up in your body, it's also not that good, even if we don't know that what is happening there yet. So we have to look for ways to treat this material with care. And of course, consumers can do that share, but they should not have the main burden. That's very clear. The burden is on the government. So my institution, other institutions, other governments around the globe, and the burden is of course on companies, the producers and the retailers. When it comes to government, it's very obvious that the need for a proper waste management is urgent. If there is no waste management system, where do consumers should bring the material? So they had to be educated how to treat it, and they have to be supported by bringing it into the loop again to have further use of the material, preferably as a recycling or reuse. But if that is not possible, then the use of the energy in the plastic is much better than if the material would be dumped. And of course, companies, producers, retailers have their responsibility. They should direct consumers to do the right things and to put the things in the right bin, so to say. And some of the examples are shown in the report how this is done. Yes, they are also in the responsibility for setting up proper recycling systems and accept producer responsibility, like we have that in many European countries. This is not easy, and yes, of course, this is costly because sometimes the cost for recycling is higher than the value of the material. But if the material ends up somewhere in nature, then the costs are high as well. Producers and retailers should make it as easy as possible for the consumer to handle the plastic product in the right way and to avoid having plastic being dumped in the environment, be it on the land or be it in the water systems, in the rivers, lakes, or the ocean, where it often ends up. So this report, in our view, shall help government, companies, consumer organizations, and others to address this challenge of handling plastics in the right way and avoid plastic waste being dumped into nature. And yes, we are looking at the report, and from the report there will be also drawn some further recommendations, more stringent recommendations maybe, when the report and the work as such is presented at the United Nations Environment Ministers Assembly in 2021, UNEA 5. So this work will continue, and the programs, not only the consumer information program of the One Planet Network, but other programs will also contribute, and there will be, or there is some organizational stewardship, I should say, from the Life Cycle Initiative of the United Nations Environment Program, and we are looking forward to work on that further. Because just having a report doesn't stop the problem. So that was it from my side, and I'm very open to questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Ulf. And now over to Ms. Eva Schneider, who is the Sustainability and Communications Manager at AIM, which is the European Brands Association.
Thank you, Naomi. Good morning, everyone. You can all hear me, I hope?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Good morning, everyone. My name is Eva Schneider. I'm the Sustainability and Communications Manager at AIM, the European Brands Association. And of course, we are pleased to be part of the advisory committee of the Consumer Information Program of the One Planet Network. So first of all, thank you for the great work on the report, and congratulations to the team for presenting it today. The report is definitely a great information source regarding existing consumer information on plastic packaging that gives a good overview on the current state of play and can be used by many stakeholders working on packaging with a focus on plastic and waste. So I was asked by Naomi and Niels to give a short outline regarding the brand perspective on this topic and AIM's and our members' current activities on packaging and consumer information. So thank you very much for inviting me. First, for the webinar participants that are maybe not familiar with AIM, I just wanted to give you a quick introduction. Thank you. So AIM is the European Brands Association. We represent European manufacturers of branded consumer goods on key issues that affect their ability to design, distribute, and market their brands. So our membership comprises 50 direct corporate members and 20 national associations. So altogether, we represent 2,500 companies, ranging from SMEs to multinationals. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of our membership, as you can see here, our 50 direct corporate members, it's a very broad membership ranging from food to non-food, including luxury brands, cosmetics brands, toys, so very broad. Next slide, please. Coming to the report, I would like to start by emphasizing that the topic of consumer information on sustainability features of a product or packaging, so also tackled, of course, partly in the presented report. And more in general, the topic of consumer empowerment is one of the priority topics in the current green debate on EU level. So as you all, I guess, know, it started with the new Commission publishing the European Green Deal in December last year. As you can see here, the Green Deal tackles different priorities and sectors, and overall it clearly calls for empowering consumers to make informed choices and play an active role in the ecological transition. In the context of mobilizing industry for a clean and circular economy, the Commission published its new Circular Economy Action Plan on the 11th of March this year. So this action plan highlights consumer empowerment as a clear priority and refers to various initiatives in this area. I will not refer to all the initiatives that are outlined in the action plan, but among others, it refers to setting minimum requirements for sustainability labels and logos and information tools, but also looks into the establishment of an EU harmonized model for separate collection of waste. So as you know, within the European Union, different countries have different collection system and waste management systems, and even within one country, different areas differ in their collection systems. So that is one point that was raised in the Circular Economy Action Plan. And in this context, the Commission will also look into an EU-wide labeling approach that facilitates the correct separation of packaging waste at source. So examples that are highlighted here refer to consumer involvement by introducing labels, harmonized symbols, or information campaigns. And we can all see that this clearly reflects the report and the work that has been undertaken by the Consumer Information Program. So I think it's really a perfect timing for the report. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit an idea on the initiatives where AIM and brands are currently involved in when it comes to plastic, packaging, and consumer information. The first point I wanted to mention here is the empowerment of consumers in Europe's digital age. So we believe in better consumer information through digital means, for example, through QR codes or digital watermarks. And so next to on-pack consumer information, we believe that there is a huge potential for developing digital as an alternative or a supplement to physical product information. And together with 21 other associations, AIM has reached out to the European Commission recently and advocated for a coordinated approach through, for example, establishing a dedicated European stakeholders forum for digital consumer information. The second project or initiative I wanted to mention here is called Holy Grail 2.0. That is an initiative that refers to digital watermarks that can be used for consumer information. In this particular initiative, packaging is coded with digital watermarks in order to achieve more accurate sorting and higher quality recycling. So this is an initiative that where AIM at the moment is involved in discussions on how to set this up. The third point I wanted to mention in this context is the nudge approach that AIM promotes in order to inspire more responsible consumer behavior. AIM has launched its Brands Nudging for Good initiative back in 2015 to demonstrate, but also to encourage our brands to launch Nudging for Good initiatives in order to inspire consumers and help them to adopt healthy and more sustainable behavior, of course, based on consumer insights. And the last point I wanted to refer to here is the Circular Plastics Alliance. It's an initiative that has been initiated by the European Commission. to boost the EU market for recycled plastics. This alliance is comprised of key industry stakeholders from the complete plastics value chain in order to work together to achieve the target of 10 million tons of recycled plastics in new products on the EU market by 2025. This target has been set in the European Plastics Strategy, and AIM and also some of our members are involved in particular in the packaging working group within this alliance. Next slide, please. That was already the end of my short presentation. Thanks for your attention. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise them or contact me directly via the contact details outlined here. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. And now on to the perspective from Mr. Bjorn Erik Lon, who's the elected chair of the Global Eco-Labelling Network.
Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I'm representing the Type 1 eco-labels in the multi-stakeholder advisory committee on the program, and have been involved in both the guidelines for consumer information and this plastic report. And I'm very happy to see that we can combine this work and in such an important environmental issue as the plastic packages and the recycling and reducing of the environmental impact from that. Type 1 eco-labels are the multiple criteria, life cycle based criteria with third-party certification, and we are not using that kind of labels directly on packaging materials. Usually there are some of our members that have requirements also for packaging materials, but that's more specific. It's more about that in Type 1 eco-labeling we are considering are plastic packaging relevant for that product group where we have these requirements defined, and are the materials easily separatable, the packaging as such, and some generic information on the quality of the packaging. And then a very special one is that I noticed from the work by the Nordic Swan eco-label in the 5 Nordic countries. We have this calculation on the packaged weight compared to the functional unit to save packaged material as such, but that and then combined with some limitations on what materials you can use, and that is the possibility to separate. That's the way how the Type 1 eco-labels are considering this. But it is, as this report puts forward, very important to have standardized definitions of what claims are put forward and how what they stand for. In connection to that, I'm also involved in revision work in the International Standard Organization on revising the 2 standards on environmental information, the general principles in the ISO 14020, and then also the standard on 14021, the self-declared claims. And here the intention is to have the vocabulary and the principles and the general requirements for all kinds of environmental statements, including the issues of recyclability, the compostability, and so on, and how these can be put forward in a reliable and systematic, internationally acceptable general way. And the work in this revision of these 2 standards is ongoing. We're actually working on that in a small working group only these days, and the time schedule for the work is that we hope to have a new ISO 14020 with these principles published within a year from now at the latest. One example that explains or shows how difficult this issue is that you will see in the report that one of the most praised, as Niels was mentioning, there were only 5 labels that have from the expert panel, so to say, been praised together. So one on the recycling issue, that's a very detailed information on a 5-point or 5 different issues covered, because it's the detailed information should be for all parts of a package, all kind of materials that are including in the package, not only the specific plastics, but also other parts. And then it is possible to have a proper, correct information, a label, or even a claim if you follow the international agreements on how you say and what the different signs, logos, and claims are standing for. So and that work is ongoing, and we hope that will make clarity into this problem, which is something that touches every consumer all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bjorn Erik. That was really clear, and I think we've got some real clear stepping stones to show how we can really implement the recommendations from this report to make them a reality. So we've had several questions in during the course of this presentation, and I'd like to thank again all the speakers for their work and interventions here, and like to focus on the recommendations that we presented and what is the audience's response, what do you think can be done here. So we've had lots of different questions. For example, we've had a question, and perhaps Niels, you can answer this very quickly. So someone is asking for a little bit more information about the scope of the report, and they're from a consumer advocacy association, one of the members of Consumers International, and they're asking the geographies and how many claims were checked throughout this report, and from which geographies, considering it's a global report.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. I mean, we did, the authors of the report did check quite a few different claims from various geographies. I mean, of course, language barriers were there, but they used a lot of different consultants as well to provide examples from various geographies. And we have a couple of examples in the report, but also didn't show a lot of detailed examples from brands due to legal concerns, I would say. But we still draw out the main messages of what the claims are in the marketplace and what the concerns are more generally, and also make recommendations on how to improve that space. And particularly, for example, with the ocean plastic, I mean, there are popular examples out there, but yeah, we see that this category has a lot of issues about the definitions.
Great. And someone has asked, did you look at the disconnect between claims of being biodegradable and whether it's the reality of being biodegradable in practice?
Sorry. Did you mean biodegradable? I think he asked about the difference between biodegradable and biofragmentability. But I think this is something we didn't look into in the report. I mean, we only looked at biodegradability in general, and in that category, we certainly see that there's a disconnect between what the claims say and what's happening in practice. And yeah, I think there's also another question coming in, whether this should be banned. Like apparently France has enacted legislation to that effect. So there's a lot of concern about this claim and also about the implications, and that it can be confusing consumers and lead to increased littering. So this is something that needs to be addressed more, I think.
Thank you. And Swati Sambial from UN Habitat has raised a concern that in developing countries, lots of standards are not followed or exist, and lots of packaging is informal, done by small-scale companies with no labels and mostly no regulation. So how do you think plastic packaging in developing countries can meet international standards?
Yeah, I think this is a big challenge. I mean, that's also why we formulated the recommendation 3 on that standards and labels and standards in particular need to better reflect actual conditions. I mean, maybe there's a case to be made that we need to have, even though we want global harmonization, maybe there are differences that need to be acknowledged between developing and developed countries. And I mean, most of these standard bodies, they are based in the Western world and in developed countries. So it's a different perspective. And I certainly see the challenges with developing countries having a more informal recycling sector. And also, I think in that that's also something we want to look into more when we develop the key messages for different sectors, that we acknowledge the regional variations and make more specific recommendations also that are valid for developing countries. I think the case here is maybe more, first of all, of course, governments need to try and work on getting a better infrastructure in place. I think that needs also funding support, of course. And secondly, maybe there's also a case to be made that businesses need to take more responsibility in these regions. They can't just sell products that are not easy to recycle, or need to have more producer responsibility in that sense, and maybe even support investment in recycling infrastructure. There are, I think, already some examples, for example, in Asia, where a lot of the plastic leakage into the marine environment is happening, that certain companies are pulling together to fund the building in recycling infrastructure. And I think that that's an important way of addressing some of the issues in developing countries.
Thank you. And Stephen from the Life Cycle Initiative has said there's a huge push to get consumers to use alternatives to plastic packaging. But is it possible to get information on the alternatives, and could this be better information on those alternatives? Could that help to find a more sustainable packaging solution?
Yeah, nice to see Stephen on the call. Yeah, I think that's also a very good question. I mean, for example, our colleagues in the Life Cycle Initiative at UNEP, they have done some initial studies on comparing plastic packaging with their alternatives. And actually, if you look at the overall environmental impact, plastic is not always the worst choice in a way, because of the lightweight material being used. It has certain benefits over, for example, glass or metal, which has a higher resource inputs and greater emissions. So in terms of a climate balance, it's a different situation. But then I think the problem with plastic is really on the recycling aspect and the leakage into the environment, and the fact that so much of the material is just staying in the environment. And that's something we need to maybe give more weight to when we do these life cycle assessments of the different materials. And ideally, I think we need to push much more into the direction of reuse models and the circular economy. I mean, that can also work with plastics, because plastics is a material that can be recyclable if it's properly designed. So maybe that's something we need to encourage more in general. I mean, yeah, if you have, for example, PET bottles where the value of recycling is generally high, then this is something that can work better. But the problem we have at the moment is that for a lot of plastic material, either there are certain additives or other issues that prevent the recycling, and it's just more costly than producing new virgin plastic. And this is where the problem arises.
Thank you. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining today's webinar. The report, as we have said, will be released this Friday on the 15th of May, and it'll be available for free download on the Consumers International and One Planet Network websites. Thank you very much for all the questions that were raised, and on the screen now you'll be able to see the contact details of our contacts and ability to sign up for any newsletters or email us. We're open to any further questions that you all may have, and we're really looking forward to furthering this work and really implementing the 5 key recommendations that we've made in this report to really create a better landscape for consumers across the world in terms of recycling and disposability of plastic packaging. So thank you very much. You'll be able to listen to this webinar on demand on the One Planet Network YouTube channel shortly, and we'll follow up with an email. So thank you all and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you to the team. Have a great day.
Have a good day.
Thank you, Naomi.